Meanwhile, European Union leaders are gathering at a Brussels summit today to discuss controls on irregular immigration. The leaders plan to endorse a stepping up in a tough approach to African governments and people to curb the surge in migrants crossing the Sahara and sailing from Libya to Italy. Arrivals in Italy so far this year are nearly 6% higher than the same period of 2015. Italy received 154,000 migrants last year, and this year's figure will be similar or slightly higher. At the summit, European Union leaders will agree to use money and trade to persuade African countries to curb emigration and a shift towards a more hard-nosed joint foreign policy. Well, let's discuss this further with CCTV's Mariam Zaid, who's following events at this summit in Brussels, and Deji Badmas live for us in Lagos. Mariam, what are the options the EU leaders are looking at to stem the illegal immigration?
Well, if you ask the question, will this be a migration summit? The answer is quite possibly no, judging by what has been already said. Now, the European Commission President Donald Tusk, in his invitation letter that precedes the summit, said that we are slowly turning the corner. He specifically pointed at figures for September that show migrant arrivals in Greece are down 98% from last year, and that twice as many irregular migrants have been returned so far this year. But it should be noted that the EU is still trying to find a policy on migration that works for all member states who have been banging their heads together on it so far. Now, migration is, though, the focus of today's working session of EU leaders, and this summit will specifically look at protecting borders, so countering illegal migration, and to control the flow of migrants through central and eastern Mediterranean routes.
Deji, according to statistics, the number of illegal migrants crossing over to Europe keeps increasing every year. Nigeria has been identified as one of the source nations in Africa. What is fueling this movement?
Penina, the basic reason is economic. I mean, I've spoken to quite a number of migrants, those who actually attempted to leave this country and didn't succeed, and some of those who actually came back and were deported. The basic reason they give is economic. I mean, things are difficult. Getting a job is not easy. You just have to look at the unemployment statistics in this country. It's really quite high. But apart from Nigeria, if you take a look at other countries, especially around the Lake Chad Basin, Basin Commission countries now, it's not just economic, it's also tied to the conflict in the region. I'm talking about the Boko Haram conflict, which is, of course, exacerbated the economic conditions of people around the region now. So basically economic, but also tied to a conflict, of course, the Boko Haram conflict. One of the reasons, for instance, you would see a lot of people leaving the Lake Chad Basin region trying to migrate is just because, you know, their source of livelihood has been destroyed, and most of them have been displaced. And because they do not feel safe anymore, the next thing they just try to do is to try and migrate to a safer place, and a place where they think their economic fortunes would be better. So that's basically it, Penina.
So, Mariam, will the EU get tough on African migrants?
Well, absolutely. They could quite possibly throw the book at Africa. Now, Europe, who is one of Africa's biggest donor countries, wants to use a mix of incentives and put pressure on African governments to curb migration to Europe. And there will be consequences for those that don't. Now, some African governments have so far been reluctant to take back their EU-deported citizens. The European Commission is offering €8 billion over 5 years for aid targeted at providing incentives to citizens to basically stay put. Now, at the summit today, it is expected that they will endorse pilot projects to put the pressure on African governments via aid leverage to slow the exodus of people north across the Sahara and Mediterranean. It also wants to have swift results from an EU campaign to deport large numbers who reach Italy.
Deji, what kind of reactions should we expect from nations such as Nigeria should the EU proceed with that proposal to link future aid and cooperation to the nation's cooperation in helping curb migration to the EU?
Well, it's difficult to tell the kind of reaction we're going to get. But the fact is that I believe that the EU would also understand that some of these African countries, especially countries in the Lake Chad Basin area, are facing very difficult conditions. No question at all that the EU has been doing quite a lot, especially in Nigeria. It spent around 21 million euros in humanitarian assistance in 2015. It has upped that to 40 million euros this year. But, you know, fact is, as I said, the countries in this region are facing the Boko Haram crisis, which is making it very difficult for them to properly police the border. And we're talking about the desert now. We're talking about the vast Saharan desert. You look at the countries in the Lake Chad Basin now bordering that desert. You're talking about Niger, Chad, and Nigeria. These countries are engulfed by the Boko Haram crisis. The militaries in this country are overstretched. So, and they are currently battling that Boko Haram crisis. They are not paying attention at all to the borders. So it's a good thing that some European countries like Germany has committed to the redevelopment of the Lake Chad Basin area. That might possibly help. And if the crisis, the Boko Haram crisis, is brought to an end, then maybe the militaries in these various countries will begin to channel their attention now to checking illegal migrants. But the fact is that, yes, these countries need these aids, but I do not think, if you ask me, Penina, that these aids will automatically translate to better policing of the borders and preventing people who would want to leave these countries now for Europe.
All right, Dejupan was live for us there in Lagos. Mariam Zaid live in Brussels. Many thanks to the both of you for joining us.